My name is Victoria Martinez, and at 34 years old, I thought I had built the perfect life in sunny San Diego. What I didn't realize was that the man I'd been married to for 8 years had been systematically planning to steal everything I'd worked for, using nothing more than my trust and a stack of papers he claimed were routine insurance documents. The moment I signed that quitclaim deed, thinking I was updating our homeowner's policy, I unknowingly handed over my half of our $1.2 million beach house to the man who was already planning his exit strategy with his 26-year-old personal trainer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in a working-class family in East Los Angeles, I learned early that nothing comes easy, and everything worth having requires sacrifice. My parents, Maria and Roberto, had immigrated from Guadalajara with nothing but determination and the clothes on their backs. They worked double shifts at the garment factory and saved every penny so their 3 daughters could have opportunities they never had. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older sister Carmen, who became a nurse, and my younger sister Isabella, who followed her artistic dreams to become a graphic designer. Education was my escape route. While my classmates spent weekends at the mall or hanging out at the park, I was buried in textbooks, determined to earn the scholarship that would change my family's trajectory. My hard work paid off when I received a full ride to UCLA, where I studied business administration with a focus on real estate development. The campus felt like another world compared to the cramped apartment I shared with my family, but I never forgot where I came from or the sacrifices my parents made to get me there. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at Morrison Associates, one of San Diego's most prestigious real estate development firms. The work was demanding, often requiring 16-hour days and weekend site visits, but I thrived on the challenge. Within 5 years, I had worked my way up to project manager, overseeing luxury condominium developments along the coastline. My salary had grown from $45,000 to $125,000 annually, and for the first time in my life, I felt financially secure. That's when I met David Thornton at a charity auction for the San Diego Children's Hospital. He was 32 then, tall and lean with sandy brown hair and the kind of confident smile that drew people in like a magnet. David worked as a financial advisor for high-net-worth clients, driving a silver BMW and wearing suits that cost more than my monthly rent. When he approached me during the silent auction, offering to explain the investment potential of the vintage wine collection being auctioned, I was immediately struck by his sophistication and apparent success. Our first date was at George's at the Cove in La Jolla, where David ordered wine that cost more than I typically spent on groceries in a month. He listened intently as I described my latest project, a 40-unit luxury development in Mission Beach, asking intelligent questions about zoning regulations and market trends. When I offered to split the check, he laughed and insisted on paying, saying it was his pleasure to treat a successful woman like myself to dinner. David's world was a revelation to me. He lived in a sleek downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, filled with modern furniture and abstract art that he claimed to understand. His social circle included investment bankers, successful entrepreneurs, and what he called old San Diego money. These were people who attended charity galas not out of obligation, but because they genuinely had money to donate. People who owned vacation homes in Aspen and spent holidays in Europe. The contrast between David's lifestyle and my own was stark, but not uncomfortable. While I still lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Hillcrest and drove a reliable Honda Civic, I was proud of my accomplishments and unashamed of my background. David seemed to appreciate my work ethic and ambition, often telling his friends how impressed he was by my success in a male-dominated industry. 6 months into our relationship, David began talking about our future together. He painted pictures of the life we could build, combining his financial expertise with my real estate knowledge to create a real estate investment empire. We could flip luxury properties, he suggested, using his connections to secure financing and my construction knowledge to maximize profits. The idea was intriguing, especially when he mentioned properties in prime locations like Del Mar and Rancho Santa Fe. When David proposed 18 months later, It was during a weekend trip to Napa Valley. We were staying at a boutique hotel overlooking the vineyards, and he had arranged a private dinner on the terrace as the sun set over the rolling hills. The ring was stunning, a 2-carat diamond set in platinum that must have cost at least $20,000. As he dropped to one knee and asked me to be his wife, I felt like I was living in a fairy tale. Our wedding was elegant but not ostentatious, held at the Hotel del Coronado with 150 guests. My parents were overwhelmed by the luxury of the venue and the sophistication of David's family and friends, but they were proud to see their daughter marrying such a successful man. David's parents, Robert and Patricia Thornton, were polite but somewhat distant, clearly from a different social stratum. His father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships, and his mother served on the boards of several prominent charities. After the honeymoon in Tuscany, we began house hunting in earnest. David insisted we needed something that reflected our combined success and future potential. We looked at properties in La Jolla del Mar, and finally settled on a stunning contemporary home in Pacific Beach, just 2 blocks from the ocean. The house was everything I had ever dreamed of: 3,000 square feet with an open floor plan, a gourmet kitchen with granite countertops, and a master suite with panoramic ocean views. The price was $1. $2 million, more than I had ever imagined spending on a home, but David assured me it was a smart investment. Property values in coastal San Diego were only going to increase, he explained, and we could easily refinance or sell for a profit in a few years. Together, we qualified for the mortgage, with my income as a senior project manager now approaching $140,000, and David's financial advisory practice generating what he claimed was around $200,000 annually. The early years of our marriage were blissful. I loved coming home to our beautiful house after long days at construction sites, finding David already there with dinner prepared and wine opened. He had a talent for creating romantic atmospheres, surprising me with weekend getaways to wine country or spontaneous dinners at new restaurants. We entertained frequently, hosting dinner parties for David's clients and colleagues, and I took pride in playing the role of the successful wife and hostess. David encouraged me to take on bigger projects at work, to push for promotions and salary increases. When Morrison Associates offered me a position as Senior Development Manager with a $160,000 salary, David was more excited than I was. He immediately began talking about leveraging my increased income to invest in additional properties, perhaps starting with a small rental property in a up-and-coming neighborhood. Our first investment property was a 2-bedroom bungalow in North Park that needed significant renovation. David handled the financing while I oversaw the construction work, using my industry contacts to get quality work at reasonable prices. We spent 6 months and $75,000 renovating the property, then sold it for a $45,000 profit. The success was intoxicating, and David immediately began looking for our next project. Over the next 3 years, we completed 4 more renovation projects, each one more ambitious than the last.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
David's financial planning skills complemented my construction knowledge perfectly, and we developed a reputation among local real estate agents as serious investors who could close deals quickly. Our combined income had grown to over $350,000 annually, and our net worth was approaching $800,000 when including our primary residence and investment property equity. It was around this time that David suggested we needed better insurance coverage for our growing real estate portfolio. He had been working with a new insurance agent, he explained, someone who specialized in high net worth individuals and could provide comprehensive coverage for all our properties. The paperwork would be extensive, he warned, but it was necessary to protect everything we had built together. David also mentioned that he had been thinking about expanding his financial advisory practice, perhaps bringing in a partner or opening a second office. He had been working closely with a young woman named Stephanie Walsh, a former personal trainer who had transitioned into financial services after earning her certification. Stephanie was ambitious and eager to learn, David explained, and she had been helping him research new investment opportunities and manage some of his more demanding clients. I met Stephanie once at a company holiday party, a petite blonde with an athlete's build and an enthusiastic smile. She seemed pleasant enough, though I noticed she had a tendency to touch David's arm when she spoke to him and to seek his approval for even minor decisions. When I mentioned this observation to David later, He laughed it off, saying that Stephanie was young and still learning the business. Her eagerness to please was actually an asset, he assured me, because it meant she would work hard to prove herself. The insurance paperwork arrived on a Tuesday in March, delivered by courier in a thick manila envelope. David spread the documents across our dining room table, explaining each section as he had promised. There were policies for our primary residence, our rental properties, and additional umbrella coverage that would protect us from potential lawsuits. The premiums were higher than our previous coverage, but David assured me the increased protection was worth the extra cost. Mixed in with the insurance documents were several other papers that David described as routine financial updates. A refinancing document for one of our rental properties, he explained, pointing to a section that required both our signatures. An updated deed for our primary residence that reflected recent improvements we had made. Another paper that needed our joint signatures. There were so many documents that I began to feel overwhelmed, trusting David's explanations as he guided me through page after page of legal language. "Just sign here," David said repeatedly, pointing to signature lines highlighted in yellow. His tone was casual, almost bored, as if these were nothing more than routine paperwork that stood between us and our evening plans. I signed document after document, barely reading the dense legal text that filled each page. David was the financial expert in our relationship, after all, and I trusted his judgment completely. One document in particular caught my attention, if only because the language seemed different from the insurance papers. It was titled Quit Claim Deed at the top, and it involved our primary residence on Emerald Street. When I asked David about it, he explained that it was simply updating the property records to reflect the improvements we had made to the house. The city required updated documentation when significant renovations were completed, he said, and this was just a formality to keep our records current. I signed the quitclaim deed along with all the other documents, trusting my husband's explanation, just as I had trusted him with every other major financial decision in our 8-year marriage. David collected all the signed papers efficiently, promising to deliver them to the appropriate offices and agencies the next day. That night, we celebrated the completion of our paperwork with expensive wine and takeout from our favorite Italian restaurant, toasting to our continued success and financial security. What I didn't understand at the time was that by signing that quitclaim deed, I had just transferred my entire ownership interest in our $1.2 million home to David alone. The document had nothing to do with insurance updates or city requirements for renovation records. It was a legal instrument that effectively removed my name from the deed to our house, making David the sole owner of the property we had purchased together as husband and wife. The weeks following the paperwork signing felt normal on the surface, but looking back, I can see subtle changes in David's behavior that should have raised red flags. He began working later hours, often not returning home until after 9 in the evening. When I asked about his schedule, he explained that he was pursuing several large new clients who required extensive research and planning. Stephanie was helping with the additional workload, he mentioned, often staying late at the office to assist with client presentations and market analysis. David also became more secretive about his phone and computer, changing passwords and angling screens away from me when I entered the room. When I commented on this change, he said he was handling sensitive client information that required additional security measures. Some of his new clients were high-profile individuals who demanded complete confidentiality, he explained, and he couldn't risk any accidental breaches of privacy. Our intimate life began to suffer as well. David seemed distracted during conversations, often checking his phone or making excuses to step outside for business calls. He stopped initiating romantic gestures, no longer surprising me with flowers or planning weekend getaways. When I tried to discuss my concerns, he dismissed them as work stress and assured me things would return to normal once he finished securing his new client base. The first concrete sign that something was seriously wrong came 6 weeks after the paperwork signing. I was reviewing our monthly financial statements when I noticed an unfamiliar charge on David's credit card. It was for $3.200 at a jewelry store in La Jolla, a purchase made on a Tuesday afternoon when David had told me he was meeting with clients. When I asked him about it, he claimed it was a watch he had purchased as a gift for a major client who had just signed a substantial investment contract. More suspicious charges appeared over the following weeks. Expensive dinners at restaurants I had never heard of, charges at a spa in Del Mar, hotel bills for weekend stays when David claimed to be attending financial conferences. Each time I questioned these expenses, David had ready explanations about client entertainment and business development costs. His practice was growing rapidly, he insisted, and these expenses were necessary investments in future success. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in early May. David had left early for what he claimed was a client breakfast meeting, leaving me alone in our beautiful house overlooking the Pacific. I was enjoying my coffee on the deck, watching surfers catch morning waves, when our neighbor Mrs. Chen knocked on the door. She was holding a certified letter that had been delivered to her address by mistake, intended for our house on Emerald Street. The letter was from the San Diego County Recorder's Office, addressed to me personally. Inside was a notification that my name had been removed from the deed to our property at my own request, referencing the quitclaim deed I had signed several weeks earlier. The document included a copy of the filed deed, showing David Thornton as the sole owner of our home. My name appeared nowhere on the current property records. The shock was immediate and overwhelming. I read the letter 3 times, hoping I was misunderstanding the legal language, but the meaning was unmistakable. The document David had told me was a routine update for city records was actually a legal instrument that had transferred my ownership rights to him completely. I was no longer a legal owner of the house I had helped purchase, the home where we had built our life together. My hands were shaking as I called David's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried his office number and got an automated message saying the office was closed for the weekend. Fighting panic, I drove to his downtown office building, but the parking lot was empty and the building was locked. David's supposed client breakfast meeting was clearly fictional, just another lie, and what I was beginning to realize was an elaborate deception. I spent the rest of that Saturday researching quitclaim deeds online, learning everything I could about what I had unknowingly signed. The information was devastating. A quitclaim deed is a legal document that transfers whatever ownership interest one person has in a property to another person. By signing it, I had given up any legal claim to our house, even though I had contributed equally to the down payment and had been paying half the mortgage for years. The implications were staggering. If David decided to sell the house, he could do so without my consent and keep all the proceeds. If he defaulted on the mortgage, I would have no legal standing to prevent foreclosure, even though my credit was tied to the loan. If something happened to David, I would have no inheritance rights to the property we had purchased as a married couple. I had been completely stripped of my legal interest in our most valuable asset. That evening, when David finally returned home, I was waiting for him in the living room with the letter from the county recorder's office spread out on the coffee table. His face went pale when he saw the documents, and for a moment his carefully constructed facade cracked. The confident financial advisor disappeared, replaced by someone who looked cornered and desperate. "Victoria, I can explain," he began, but I cut him off. "Explain what, David?" "How you tricked me into signing away my ownership of our house. How you lied about what those documents were." My voice was surprisingly steady, though inside I was screaming. David sat down across from me, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of stress I had seen countless times during our marriage. "It's not what you think. This was temporary. Just a financial strategy to protect our assets. I was going to add your name back once we completed some business transactions." The explanation was so absurd that I almost laughed. Protect our assets from what? And what business transactions? "David, I handle our finances too. I know exactly what our situation is." "There are opportunities you don't know about," he insisted. "Investment deals that require clean title to properties. Having your name on the deed was complicating some potentially lucrative arrangements." I studied my husband's face, looking for any sign of the man I had fallen in love with, the man I had trusted with my financial future and my heart. Instead, I saw a stranger, someone capable of elaborate deception and betrayal. "What opportunities, David? Be specific." He stood up and began pacing, a nervous energy radiating from him. "I've been working on a commercial development deal in Rancho Santa Fe. A shopping center that could net us over $2 million in profits. But the investors require partners to have unencumbered assets, properties with clear single ownership. And you needed to steal my half of our house to qualify for this deal? The anger was building now, replacing the initial shock and hurt. I wasn't stealing anything, David said defensively. Like I said, this was temporary. Once the deal closed, I would have added your name back to the deed. You would have benefited just as much as I would. I picked up the county recorder's letter and waved it at him. Then why didn't you tell me the truth? Why the elaborate deception about insurance papers and city requirements? David's explanations became increasingly convoluted, involving complex financial structures and investment partnerships that made little sense. As I listened to him stumble through his justifications, I realized that either he was lying about the business deal entirely, or he had planned to exclude me from the profits, just as he had excluded me from the property ownership. I want you to transfer the house back to joint ownership immediately, I said finally. Tonight. We can go to an attorney first thing Monday morning and reverse this quitclaim deed. David's response chilled me to the bone. I can't do that right now, Victoria. The property is already being used as collateral for the investment. Changing the ownership structure at this point would jeopardize the entire deal. The weight of his words hit me like a physical blow. Not only had David stolen my ownership of our house, but he had already leveraged the property for some mysterious business venture without my knowledge or consent. If his investment failed, we could lose our home entirely, and I would have no legal recourse because I was no longer an owner. What exactly have you done, David? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't meet my eyes as he answered. I used the house as collateral for a bridge loan to fund the Rancho Santa Fe project. It's perfectly safe, the loan is short-term, and the returns will more than cover any risk. Without telling me, without my consent, using a house that you tricked me into signing over to you. The full scope of his betrayal was becoming clear, and I felt physically sick. David moved toward me, his hands outstretched in a placating gesture. Victoria, please trust me on this. I know how it looks, but this is going to make us rich. Richer than we ever imagined. The shopping center deal is worth millions. I backed away from his approach, unable to bear the thought of him touching me. Trust you? You just admitted to forging documents, stealing my property, and risking our home without my knowledge. How could I ever trust you again? The argument continued for hours, with David alternating between defensive justifications and desperate apologies. He claimed he had been trying to surprise me with the success of his investment, that he had planned to reveal everything once the deal was completed and we were celebrating our newfound wealth. When that approach failed, he shifted to blaming the pressure of providing for our lifestyle, saying he had felt compelled to take risks to maintain our standard of living. Nothing he said could explain away the fundamental betrayal. He had lied to me, manipulated me into signing legal documents under false pretenses, and put our most valuable asset at risk without my consent. The man I had married, the man I had built a life with, had systematically planned and executed a theft of my property rights while maintaining the facade of a loving husband. That night I slept in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. 8 years of marriage, years of building a life together, of trusting someone completely, had been destroyed in a single conversation. I felt violated, not just financially but emotionally, as if David had reached into my chest and torn out something essential. The next morning, David was gone before I woke up, leaving only a note saying he needed time to think and would be staying at a hotel for a few days. The note included promises to fix everything, to make things right between us, but the words felt hollow and meaningless. How could someone fix a betrayal this profound? How could trust ever be rebuilt after such calculated deception? I spent that Sunday researching attorneys who specialized in real estate fraud and marital property disputes. The legal landscape was complex and intimidating, but I was determined to understand my options. Several attorneys offered free consultations, and I scheduled appointments for the following week. I also began documenting everything I could remember about the night David had presented the paperwork, writing down every detail of his explanations and my questions. By Monday morning, I had decided on my first course of action. I drove to David's office building, determined to confront him and demand immediate action to restore my property rights. But when I arrived at the 15th floor suite where Thornton Financial Planning was supposedly located, I found an empty office with a for lease sign in the window. The building manager explained that David's lease had been terminated the previous month for non-payment of rent. He had cleared out his belongings 2 weeks earlier, claiming he was relocating to a larger space. No forwarding address had been provided, and attempts to contact him about outstanding charges had been unsuccessful. Standing in that empty office, looking at the dust patterns on the carpet where David's desk and furniture had been, I realized that my husband's betrayal was far more extensive than a single forged document. His entire business, the foundation of our financial success, appeared to be either fictional or failing. The successful financial advisor I had married might never have existed at all. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Victoria, I know you're upset, but please don't do anything rash. Meet me for lunch at Giuseppe's at 1 p.m. I can explain everything and we can work this out together." Giuseppe's was the Italian restaurant where we had celebrated our first major real estate investment success, a place filled with happy memories from our early marriage. The choice of location felt manipulative, an attempt to use sentiment to soften my anger. But I agreed to meet him, hoping to get answers to the questions that had been multiplying since discovering his empty office. David was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, looking haggard and nervous. He had always been meticulous about his appearance, but today his shirt was wrinkled, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. He stood as I approached, attempting to kiss my cheek, but I moved away and sat down across from him without accepting his greeting. "Your office is empty," I said without preamble. "The building manager says you haven't paid rent in 2 months. David's carefully prepared explanations crumbled immediately. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked genuinely defeated. "The business has been struggling," he admitted quietly. "I've been trying to keep it afloat, but I lost several major clients last year." "How long?" I asked. "How long has your business been failing?" "About 18 months, he said, not meeting my eyes. "Maybe longer." I kept thinking I could turn it around, that one big success would solve everything. The timeline was devastating. David had been lying about our financial situation for most of our recent marriage, maintaining a facade of success while his business collapsed around him. The shopping center investment he had described as a sure thing was likely a desperate attempt to save his failing practice. "What about Stephanie?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. David's face flushed red, and he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Stephanie and our relationship became complicated. She's been supporting me, emotionally and financially, while I tried to rebuild the business. The admission hit me like a slap. Not only had David betrayed me financially, but he had been having an affair with his young colleague. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the expensive charges on his credit card, all of it suddenly made perfect sense." "How long have you been sleeping with her?" I demanded, my voice rising enough to attract attention from nearby tables. "Victoria, please keep your voice down," David pleaded, glancing around nervously. "It's not what you think. Stephanie and we connected over business pressures. She understood what I was going through in ways that you couldn't." I stood up abruptly, unable to listen to any more justifications or excuses. 8 years of marriage had been reduced to lies, theft, and adultery. The man sitting across from me was a stranger, someone I had never really known, despite sharing a bed and a life with him. "I want a divorce," I said, clearly, loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "I want you out of my house by the end of the week, and I want my property rights restored immediately." David reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. "Victoria, please don't be hasty. We can work through this. Couples survive worse problems than this." I pulled my hand away and picked up my purse. "No, David. Couples survive problems when both people are committed to honesty and working together. They don't survive systematic fraud and betrayal." As I walked out of Giuseppe's, leaving David sitting alone at our table, I felt a strange sense of liberation despite the devastation. The lies were finally in the open, the pretense was over, and I could begin the process of rebuilding my life based on truth rather than deception. The next morning, I met with Margaret Foster, a family law attorney who specialized in complex divorce cases involving significant assets and fraud. Margaret was a sharp woman in her 50s with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes who listened to my story without judgment or surprise. Unfortunately, cases like yours are more common than you might think, Margaret explained after I had finished recounting the events of the past weeks. Spouses who use legal documents to transfer assets before filing for divorce, often claiming business necessity or temporary arrangements. Can the quitclaim deed be reversed? I asked, hoping for good news. Margaret's expression was serious. It's possible but challenging. We'll need to prove that you signed the document under false pretenses, that David misrepresented its nature and purpose. The fact that he used the property as collateral without your knowledge strengthens our case, but real estate fraud cases can be complex and time-consuming. She explained that our first priority would be obtaining a restraining order to prevent David from selling or further encumbering the property while the case was pending. We would also need to file for divorce immediately and request temporary spousal support, since my financial security had been compromised by David's actions. I should warn you, Margaret continued, that if David's business is truly failing and he's facing significant debts, recovering your property rights might be complicated by creditor claims. We need to move quickly to protect whatever assets remain. The legal process began immediately. Margaret filed papers requesting an emergency hearing to freeze all marital assets and prevent David from disposing of any property. We also initiated divorce proceedings, citing irreconcilable differences, and seeking equitable distribution of all marital property, including the restoration of my ownership rights to our home. David hired his own attorney, an aggressive litigator named Richard Webb, who immediately filed counter motions claiming that the quitclaim deed was a legitimate business transaction that I had signed with full knowledge of its implications. According to their version of events, I had been an active participant in David's investment strategies and had agreed to the property transfer as part of a larger financial plan. The legal battle consumed the next 6 months of my life. Depositions, document production, financial investigations, and court hearings became my new routine. Margaret and her team worked tirelessly to uncover the truth about David's business dealings and his relationship with Stephanie Walsh. What they discovered was even worse than I had imagined. David's financial advisory practice had been essentially fraudulent for years, using new client deposits to pay returns to existing clients in a classic Ponzi scheme structure. He had stolen over $400,000 from client accounts, money that should have been invested but instead had been used to maintain our lifestyle and fund his affair with Stephanie. The shopping center investment in Rancho Santa Fe was completely fictional, a story David had invented to justify his theft of our house. The bridge loan he claimed to have secured using our property as collateral was actually a cash advance from Stephanie's wealthy father, money that David had promised to repay with interest from his non-existent real estate deal. Stephanie Walsh, it turned out, was not just David's lover but his co-conspirator. She had helped him forge client documents and had used her personal relationships to recruit new victims for his investment fraud. The young woman I had dismissed as an eager assistant was actually a calculating criminal who had been planning to disappear with David once they had stolen enough money to start fresh in another state. The criminal investigation began when one of David's defrauded clients filed a complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Federal agents raided David's empty office and seized financial records that documented years of systematic theft and fraud. Within weeks, both David and Stephanie were arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy. During all of this legal chaos, I was fighting my own battle to reclaim my property rights and rebuild my shattered life. The house on Emerald Street became the center of a complex legal dispute, involving my divorce case, the criminal investigation, and civil lawsuits from David's defrauded clients. Everyone wanted a piece of our $1.2 million home, and I was fighting to prove that I was a victim rather than a participant in David's crimes. The breakthrough came when Margaret's investigators discovered email communications between David and Stephanie, discussing their plan to steal my property rights months before the quitclaim deed was signed. The emails explicitly described their strategy of deceiving me about the nature of the document and their intention to exclude me from any profits from their fraudulent investment scheme. Armed with this evidence, Margaret filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that the quitclaim deed should be voided as the product of fraud and misrepresentation. The judge agreed, ruling that I had been deceived about the document's true nature and that David had no right to transfer marital property without my informed consent. My ownership rights to our home were restored, but the legal victory felt hollow. The house was still encumbered by the loan David had taken from Stephanie's father, and civil judgments from his defrauded clients created additional liens against the property. Even with my name back on the deed, I faced the prospect of losing our home to satisfy David's debts. The divorce settlement was equally complicated. California's community property laws meant that I was entitled to half of all marital assets, but those assets had been systematically looted by David's fraudulent schemes. Our investment properties had been sold to fund his Ponzi scheme, our joint bank accounts had been emptied, and even our personal belongings had been liquidated to pay for his and Stephanie's elaborate lifestyle. Margaret negotiated a settlement that gave me full ownership of our primary residence, in exchange for assuming responsibility for the legitimate mortgage debt. I would also receive David's retirement accounts and his remaining business assets, though these were largely worthless given the criminal investigation. David would be responsible for all debts related to his fraudulent activities, though his impending prison sentence made collection unlikely. The final divorce decree was signed on a rainy Tuesday in November, exactly 1 year after I had unknowingly signed away my property rights. David had already been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for his financial crimes, while Stephanie received a 4-year sentence for her role in the conspiracy. Neither of them would be eligible for parole for at least 5 years. Standing in the courthouse after the final hearing, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and uncertainty about the future. I had won back my house and my legal rights, but the financial damage was extensive. The legal fees alone had cost over $75,000, money I had been forced to borrow against the house's equity. I was essentially starting over at 35, with a large mortgage payment and damaged credit from David's financial manipulations. The emotional healing took even longer than the legal process. Trust, once shattered so completely, was difficult to rebuild. I found myself questioning every interaction, looking for hidden motives and deceptions in the most innocent conversations. Dating seemed impossible. How? Could I ever trust another person with my heart or my financial security after such a profound betrayal? Therapy helped, though progress was slow and uneven. Dr. Sarah Klein, a psychologist who specialized in trauma and betrayal, helped me understand that David's actions reflected his character flaws, not my failure to protect myself. She taught me to recognize the difference between reasonable caution and paralyzing suspicion, between learning from experience and allowing fear to control my future choices. Work became my refuge and my salvation. Morrison Associates had been supportive throughout my legal ordeal, understanding that my personal crisis was the result of criminal activity rather than poor judgment. When the company offered me a promotion to Senior Vice President of Development, I accepted eagerly, throwing myself into challenging projects that required my complete attention and expertise. The new position came with a substantial salary increase and profit-sharing opportunities that helped me rebuild my financial security. More importantly, it gave me a sense of purpose and achievement that had been missing during the long months of legal battles and emotional recovery. I was still the same competent professional I had always been, regardless of what had happened in my personal life. 2 years after my divorce was finalized, I made the difficult decision to sell the house on Emerald Street. The beautiful ocean view home that had once represented my dreams of success had become a constant reminder of David's betrayal. Every room held memories of our life together, making it impossible to move forward while living surrounded by ghosts of a fraudulent marriage. The sale proceeds, after paying off the mortgage and legal debts, gave me enough for a substantial down payment on a smaller but equally beautiful home in Mission Hills. The new house was entirely mine, purchased solely in my name with money I had earned through my own hard work. No one could ever trick me into signing away my ownership rights again, because I had learned to read every document carefully and to trust only myself with major financial decisions. The The legal education I had received during my battle with David proved invaluable in my real estate career. I understood property law, contract interpretation, and fraud prevention in ways that most developers never would. My colleagues began consulting me on complex transactions, knowing that I could spot potential problems before they became costly mistakes. The painful experience of being deceived had inadvertently made me a better professional, more thorough and careful in ways that served both my clients and my company well. 3 years after the divorce, I was leading Morrison Associates' largest project to date, a mixed-use development in downtown San Diego that would include luxury condominiums, retail spaces, and a boutique hotel. The project was worth over $50 million and represented everything I had worked toward in my career. Standing on the construction site, watching crews pour foundations for buildings I had designed and planned, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval or support. My personal life remained cautiously guarded, though I had begun accepting occasional dinner invitations from colleagues and attending social events without the constant anxiety that had plagued me in the immediate aftermath of David's betrayal. Dr. Klein had helped me understand that healing didn't require forgetting what had happened, but rather integrating the experience into a fuller understanding of myself and my capabilities. The first man who genuinely interested me romantically was Dr. Carlos Rodriguez, a pediatric surgeon I met at a charity fundraiser for children's cancer research. Carlos was recently divorced himself, having ended a marriage to a woman who had been unable to handle the demands of his medical career. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, covering everything from our professional challenges to our shared experiences with divorce and rebuilding. Carlos was patient with my need for transparency and control in financial matters, understanding that my caution came from experience rather than neurosis. When we decided to move in together after 18 months of dating, I insisted on a cohabitation agreement that clearly outlined property rights and financial responsibilities. Some people might have found my legal approach unromantic, but Carlos appreciated my directness and supported my need for security. The day we signed our cohabitation agreement, sitting across from each other at my dining room table with our attorneys present, I thought about the contrast with that terrible night when David had manipulated me into signing away my property rights. This time I read every word carefully, asked questions about anything I didn't understand, and made sure that both parties were fully informed about the implications of what we were agreeing to. The document protected both of us, while allowing our relationship to develop naturally. Carlos and I were married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with only immediate family present. The simple gold bands we exchanged cost less than $300 combined, and our reception was a casual dinner at a family-owned Mexican restaurant in Old Town. The contrast with my first wedding couldn't have been more stark, but this celebration felt genuine and meaningful, in ways that all of David's expensive gestures never had. Our honeymoon was a long weekend in Big Sur, hiking through redwood forests and staying at a modest bed and breakfast overlooking the Pacific. We spent hours talking about our future plans, our career goals, and our hopes for building a life together based on honesty and mutual respect. There were no grand gestures or expensive gifts, just two people who had learned through painful experience the value of authentic connection. The house in Mission Hills became our shared home, though the deed remained solely in my name by mutual agreement. Carlos contributed to the mortgage payments and household expenses, but we both understood that my ownership of the property was non-negotiable. He had his own financial security as a successful surgeon, and he respected my need to maintain independence in property matters. 5 years after my divorce from David, I received an unexpected letter from the federal correctional institution where he was serving his sentence. The letter was brief and formal, requesting permission to speak with me either by phone or during a prison visit. He claimed to have important information about assets that might still be recoverable, money that could rightfully belong to me as part of our divorce settlement. My initial reaction was to throw the letter away and pretend I had never received it. David had already stolen enough of my time and emotional energy. I saw no reason to give him more. But the mention of recoverable assets intrigued me, especially since my divorce settlement had left me with significant legal debts that were still being paid off slowly. After discussing the matter with Carlos and consulting with Margaret Foster, I decided to accept one phone call from David. The conversation would be recorded, as all prison calls are, and I would have my attorney present to ensure that nothing I said could be used against me in any future legal proceedings. The call came on a Thursday evening, with David's voice sounding hollow and distant through the prison phone system. He seemed genuinely surprised that I had agreed to speak with him, and his first words were an apology that sounded rehearsed and insincere. "Victoria, I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I did, but there are things you need to know about money that was never recovered during the investigation," he began. I cut him off immediately. "David, I'm only taking this call because my attorney advised me that there might be assets relevant to our divorce settlement. If you're looking for forgiveness or reconciliation, you're wasting both our time." His tone became more businesslike, the familiar sound of David in negotiation mode. "There's approximately $200,000 in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, money that the prosecutors never found during their investigation. The account is technically in both our names, opened during our marriage, so you would have legal claim to half of it." The information was stunning, but I was immediately suspicious. "Why are you telling me this now, and why wasn't this account disclosed during our divorce proceedings?" David's explanation was typically convoluted. He claimed that the account had been opened years earlier as a legitimate tax planning strategy, but that he had forgotten about it during the chaos of our divorce and his criminal trial. Only recently, while reviewing old financial documents in preparation for an appeal, had he remembered the account's existence. "I'm telling you because I want to do the right thing," he continued. "I know I destroyed our marriage and hurt you terribly, but at least I can try to help you recover some of what was lost." Margaret Foster, who was listening to the call on speakerphone, immediately began taking notes and asking pointed questions about the account's history and current status. Her legal instincts were clearly activated by the possibility of hidden assets, but she was also deeply skeptical of David's motives. After the call ended, Margaret and I spent an hour discussing the implications and potential risks of pursuing David's claim. Recovering funds from offshore accounts was expensive and time-consuming, requiring specialized attorneys who understood international banking laws. There was also the possibility that David was lying or that the account had already been seized by other creditors. "My gut tells me this is either another manipulation or a desperate attempt to reduce his sentence by providing information to prosecutors," Margaret said. "But if there really is money out there that belongs to you, we have an obligation to investigate." The investigation took 6 months and cost nearly $15,000 in legal fees, but it ultimately confirmed that David had been telling the truth about the account's existence. The Cayman Islands Bank held approximately $180,000 in an account opened during our marriage, money that appeared to have come from legitimate business profits rather than fraudulent activities. Recovering the funds required extensive documentation proving my legal rights as David's former spouse and demonstrating that the money had not been derived from criminal activity. The process was frustrating and slow, involving multiple government agencies and international treaties governing financial crimes. When the money was finally transferred to my control, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and disgust. The funds represented justice in some sense, money that had rightfully belonged to me being returned after years of legal battles. But they also served as a final reminder of my marriage to David, one last transaction in a relationship that had been built on lies and manipulation. I used half of the recovered money to pay off the remaining legal debts from my divorce, finally closing that chapter of my financial life completely. The other half went into a secure investment account earmarked for my future security, money that could never be touched by anyone else's financial problems or poor decisions. Carlos and I celebrated the resolution quietly, acknowledging that while the money was welcome, it couldn't undo the years of stress and uncertainty that David's actions had caused. We were building our own financial success through hard work and careful planning, and David's final payment felt more like closing a wound than beginning something new. The recovery of the offshore funds marked the true end of my legal entanglement with David. All assets had been accounted for, all debts had been resolved, and all claims had been satisfied. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I was completely free from any ongoing financial connection to my former husband. Dr. Klein helped me process the strange emotions that came with this final resolution. Part of me had become accustomed to the ongoing drama of legal battles and financial uncertainty. The quiet stability of my new life with Carlos sometimes felt almost anticlimactic after years of crisis and conflict. Trauma can become familiar, she explained during one of our sessions. When your nervous system has been in crisis mode for extended periods, normal life can actually feel uncomfortable at first. Learning to live without constant stress is its own kind of challenge. She was right. I found myself occasionally checking legal databases to see if new charges had been filed against David, or researching news about white-collar crime prosecutions, as if I needed to maintain some connection to the world of legal drama that had consumed so much of my energy. Gradually, with conscious effort, I redirected that energy toward positive pursuits and future planning. My career continued to flourish as I took on increasingly complex and high-profile projects. The mixed-use development in downtown San Diego was completed on schedule and under budget, earning recognition from both the City Planning Commission and the real estate industry. Morrison Associates promoted me to Executive Vice President, making me the youngest person and the first Latina to hold that position in the company's 40-year history. The promotion came with equity participation in the firm, making me a partial owner of the business I had served for over a decade. For someone whose property rights had once been stolen through deception, owning a piece of a successful company felt like the ultimate validation of my professional worth and personal resilience. Carlos and I began discussing having children, a conversation that would have been impossible during the years when my emotional and financial security were constantly under threat. The idea of bringing a child into our stable, honest relationship felt like the final proof that I had successfully rebuilt my life on a foundation of truth rather than illusion. We started trying to conceive on our second wedding anniversary, approaching parenthood with the same careful planning and open communication that characterized every aspect of our marriage. When I became pregnant 6 months later, the joy was tempered by a deep sense of gratitude for having found genuine love after experiencing such profound betrayal. The pregnancy was healthy and uneventful, giving me time to prepare both practically and emotionally for motherhood. I worked with Margaret Foster to update my will and estate planning documents, ensuring that my property and financial assets would be protected for my child, regardless of what might happen in the future. The legal documents were complex but transparent, with every provision clearly explained and understood by all parties. Our daughter, Elena Sofia Rodriguez, was born on a sunny Tuesday morning in March, exactly 5 years after I had discovered David's empty office and realized the extent of his deception. Holding my newborn daughter in the same city where my previous life had fallen apart felt like a powerful symbol of renewal and hope. Elena's birth certificate listed Carlos and me as her parents, with no mention of previous marriages or legal complications. This new little person would grow up in a household built on honesty and security, surrounded by adults who had learned through experience the value of trust and transparency. The house in Mission Hills was perfect for raising a child, with a large backyard where Elena could play safely and good schools within walking distance. The neighborhood was full of young families, creating a sense of community that had been missing from my previous life in the more isolated luxury of Pacific Beach. Carlos proved to be a devoted father, balancing his demanding surgical schedule with hands-on parenting duties. We shared nighttime feedings and diaper changes, approaching parenthood as equal partners in the same way we approached every other aspect of our marriage. The contrast with David's self-centered approach to our relationship was obvious and welcome. When Elena was 6 months old, I received news that David had been released early from federal prison due to good behavior and cooperation with ongoing financial crime investigations. The information came through Margaret Foster, who maintained contacts within the prosecutor's office, and thought I should be aware of his changed status. My immediate reaction was anxiety about potential contact attempts or harassment, but Margaret assured me that David's parole conditions included restrictions on contacting victims of his crimes. Any attempt to reach me directly would result in immediate return to prison, making such contact extremely unlikely. Still, I took additional security precautions around our home and made sure that Elena's daycare providers were aware that only Carlos and I were authorized to pick her up. The fears were probably irrational, but my experience with David had taught me that people capable of elaborate deception were also capable of other unpredictable behaviors. David never attempted to contact me directly, but I occasionally heard updates about his post-prison life through mutual acquaintances in San Diego's real estate community. He had moved to Phoenix and was working in commercial property management, apparently staying out of trouble and complying with the terms of his parole. Stephanie Walsh had been released around the same time and had relocated to Florida, as far from California as possible while remaining within the continental United States. Learning that both of them were rebuilding their lives brought complex emotions. Part of me was glad that they were staying out of further legal trouble, if only because their continued problems might have created additional complications for their victims. But another part of me felt frustrated that they seemed to be moving forward with relative ease, while their victims were still dealing with the long-term consequences of their crimes. Elena's first birthday party was held in our backyard, with close friends and family gathering to celebrate our daughter's healthy development and our continued happiness. Looking around at the group of people who had supported us through challenges and celebrated our successes, I was struck by the difference between genuine relationships and the superficial social connections that had characterized my life with David. These were people who knew our real story, who had supported me through divorce and legal battles, who celebrated Carlos's surgical successes and my professional achievements because they genuinely cared about our welfare. The contrast with David's network of business contacts and social climbers was striking and instructive. As Elena grew from infant to toddler, I found myself reflecting often on the lessons I wanted to pass on to her about relationships, trust, and financial independence. The story of my first marriage would someday be part of her family history, and I wanted her to understand both the dangers of blind trust and the possibility of recovery from even devastating betrayals. My experience with David had taught me that financial independence was not just about career success or investment returns, but about maintaining legal control over your own assets and never allowing another person to manipulate you into surrendering your rights. These lessons would be crucial for Elena as she grew up and began making her own decisions about relationships and money. Carlos and I established a college fund for Elena within weeks of her birth, contributing regularly to ensure that she would have educational opportunities, regardless of any future changes in our financial circumstances. We also created a trust fund that would provide her with financial security while teaching her the importance of hard work and personal responsibility. The trust documents were carefully crafted to prevent any future spouse or partner from accessing Elena's inheritance without her explicit consent and independent legal counsel. Having experienced firsthand how financial manipulation could destroy even the most trusting relationship, I was determined to protect my daughter from similar vulnerabilities. Elena's second birthday coincided with my promotion to partner at Morrison Associates, making me a full equity owner in the firm. The partnership agreement was negotiated carefully with full legal representation, ensuring that my interests were protected and my contributions were properly valued. The contrast with my naive approach to financial documents during my marriage to David was obvious and intentional. The partnership brought significant financial benefits, including profit-sharing distributions that substantially increased our household income. More importantly, it represented recognition of my professional competence and leadership within the real estate development industry. I had rebuilt not just my personal life but my career, achieving success that was entirely my own rather than dependent on someone else's achievements or connections. Carlos and I began planning for a larger family, hoping to give Elena a sibling while we were still young enough to handle the demands of multiple children. Our financial security was solid enough to support expansion, and our relationship was strong enough to handle the additional stresses that came with each new child. The second pregnancy came easily, resulting in twin boys who were born healthy and vigorous on a crisp October morning. Carlos Miguel and Diego Rafael Rodriguez completed our family, filling our house with the chaos and joy that comes with 3 children under 4 years old. Managing a demanding career while raising 3 young children required careful organization and significant support systems. Carlos and I hired a full-time nanny and established backup childcare arrangements to ensure that our professional responsibilities could be met without compromising our children's welfare. The financial investment in quality childcare was substantial but necessary for maintaining the careers that supported our family's security. Elena proved to be a devoted big sister, helping with her baby brothers and showing remarkable maturity for a toddler. Watching her gentle interactions with the twins, I was struck by how children raised in stable, honest households developed different instincts about trust and relationships than those who grew up with deception and conflict. My children would never experience the confusion and betrayal that had marked my own discovery of David's lies. They would grow up understanding that adults could be trusted to tell the truth about important matters, that family decisions were made through open discussion rather than manipulation, and that love was demonstrated through consistency and reliability rather than expensive gestures. The legal protections I had established around our family's assets continued to evolve as our circumstances changed. Each major milestone, from the birth of the twins to Carlos's partnership in his surgical practice, required updates to wills, insurance policies, and trust documents. I approached these legal tasks with thoroughness and attention to detail that reflected my hard-earned understanding of how quickly financial security could be threatened by inadequate planning. Margaret Foster remained our family attorney, helping us navigate the complex legal requirements of protecting a growing family's interests. Her expertise had been invaluable during my divorce, and her continued guidance helped ensure that Carlos and I were building something that could withstand whatever challenges the future might bring. When Elena turned 5 and started kindergarten, I was amazed by how much my life had changed since that terrible morning when I discovered David's betrayal. The frightened, financially vulnerable woman who had been manipulated into signing away her property rights had been replaced by a confident mother and business owner who approached every decision with careful consideration and legal protection. The house in Mission Hills had been expanded and renovated to accommodate our growing family, with additions that increased both its size and its value. Unlike the Pacific Beach house that had been purchased with David's family money and lost through his deception, this property was entirely our own, bought and improved through our legitimate earnings and careful planning. Carlos and I celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at the same restaurant where we had signed our cohabitation agreement years earlier. The evening was a chance to reflect on how far we had traveled together, from two cautious divorced people protecting themselves from further hurt, to a confident married couple raising 3 children and building a successful life together. The conversation that evening touched on our hopes for the future, our pride in our children's development, and our gratitude for having found each other after experiencing failed first marriages. We also discussed practical matters like college planning, retirement savings, and estate planning, approaching these topics with the same openness and collaboration that characterized every aspect of our relationship. That night, lying in bed in our secure home with our children sleeping safely in their rooms, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. The betrayal and financial theft that had once seemed like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of a better life, one built on authentic relationships and genuine security, rather than appearances and manipulation. David's theft of my property rights had ultimately taught me lessons about self-protection and financial independence that served me well in every subsequent relationship and business transaction. The pain of his deception had been terrible, but the strength and wisdom I had developed in response to that pain had made me a better partner, mother, and professional. Elena, Carlos Miguel, and Diego would grow up with advantages I never had, not just financial security but emotional security as well. They would learn from my experience without having to repeat my mistakes, understanding both the importance of trust in relationships and the necessity of maintaining individual strength and independence. The offshore account money that David had finally disclosed became the foundation for Elena's college fund, transformed from a symbol of betrayal into an investment in our daughter's future education. The irony was not lost on me that David's final act of manipulation had actually benefited the family he had tried to destroy through his earlier deceptions. As our children grew and our careers continued to flourish, Carlos and I began discussing the possibility of establishing a charitable foundation focused on helping victims of financial fraud. My experience with David had shown me how devastating white-collar crime could be for families, and how inadequate the support systems were for people trying to rebuild their lives after such betrayals. The foundation would provide legal assistance, financial counseling, and emotional support for people who had been victimized by spouses, business partners, or financial advisors. Having walked that difficult path myself, I understood both the practical challenges and the emotional trauma that came with discovering that someone you trusted had been systematically stealing from you. Planning for the foundation gave new meaning to my experience with David, transforming personal pain into a tool for helping others. The legal knowledge I had gained, the financial strategies I had developed, and the emotional healing I had achieved could all be shared with people facing similar challenges. Elena's 6th birthday party was held at our expanded house, with a backyard full of children from her elementary school class. Watching her play with friends in the same space where Carlos and I had celebrated our early milestones, I was struck by how completely we had managed to create a new life from the wreckage of my first marriage. The children playing in our yard would grow up in an era where financial fraud was increasingly sophisticated, where social media and digital communication made deception easier than ever before. Teaching them about trust and skepticism, about love and self-protection, would be one of our most important responsibilities as parents. Elena was already showing signs of inheriting my analytical mind and Carlos's steady temperament, qualities that would serve her well in navigating future relationships and financial decisions. The twins were still too young to reveal their personalities clearly, but they were developing in an environment where honesty was valued and questions were encouraged rather than dismissed. Our family's financial security continued to grow as both Carlos and I advanced in our respective careers. The real estate development business provided substantial returns during San Diego's continued growth, while Carlos's surgical practice expanded to include innovative procedures that attracted patients from throughout Southern California. We were careful to avoid the lifestyle inflation that had characterized my life with David, maintaining reasonable expenses despite our increased income. The expensive cars, luxury vacations, and designer clothing that had once seemed so important now appeared shallow and potentially dangerous, symbols of a value system that prioritized appearance over substance. Instead, we invested in experiences that brought our family closer together, and assets that provided genuine security. Family trips focused on education and adventure rather than luxury accommodations. Home improvements emphasized functionality and long-term value rather than impressive aesthetics. The contrast with my previous lifestyle was stark but intentional. Having learned how quickly apparent wealth could disappear when it was built on deception, I preferred genuine financial security over impressive displays of prosperity. Our children would grow up understanding the difference between real success and its imitation. When Elena turned 7 and started 2nd grade, she began asking questions about my first marriage and why she didn't have grandparents on my side from my previous relationship. The conversations were age-appropriate but honest, helping her understand that adults sometimes made bad choices that hurt other people, and that it was possible to recover from even serious mistakes. These discussions became opportunities to teach Elena about trust, skepticism, and the importance of maintaining her own identity and independence, even within loving relationships. The lessons were abstract for a 7-year-old, but they would become more relevant as she grew older and began forming her own romantic attachments. Carlos proved to be an excellent co-parent in these difficult conversations, supporting my desire for honesty while helping Elena understand that not all adults were like David, that most people could be trusted to act with integrity and kindness. The balance between caution and openness was delicate but crucial for raising children who could form healthy relationships without being naive about potential dangers. Our 10th wedding anniversary, celebrated when Elena was 8 and the twins were 4, marked a full decade of building something real together. The party was small and intimate, reflecting our preference for genuine relationships over social spectacle. Margaret Foster attended, along with colleagues from both our professional lives and close friends who had supported us through various challenges. Looking around at our guests that evening, I was struck by how different this group was from the people who had attended my first wedding. These were relationships built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than business connections or social climbing. The foundation was solid enough to support both celebration and crisis, success and disappointment. Carlos's toast that evening reflected on our journey from cautious new relationship to confident family unit, acknowledging both the challenges we had overcome individually and the successes we had achieved together. His words captured something essential about second chances and the possibility of building something better from the lessons of previous failures. Elena's response to the anniversary celebration was particularly meaningful, as she thanked both Carlos and me for creating a home where she felt safe and loved. Her childish words carried weight beyond their simple expression, representing validation that our efforts to build something authentic had succeeded in the most important measure. The twins, still too young for sophisticated understanding, nevertheless seemed to absorb the atmosphere of celebration and security. They were growing up in an environment where adult relationships were characterized by consistency and honesty, where financial decisions were made through collaboration rather than manipulation. As I looked ahead to Elena's teenage years and the twins' development into school-age children, I felt confident that we had created something that could withstand whatever challenges the future might bring. The legal protections were in place, the financial security was solid, and most importantly, the relationship between Carlos and me was built on a foundation of truth that could support whatever weight life might place upon it. The story of my betrayal by David would always be part of my family's history, but it would not define our future. Instead, it would serve as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, independence, and the courage to start over when circumstances require fundamental change. Elena and her brothers would grow up knowing that survival was possible even after devastating loss, and that rebuilding could result in something stronger and more authentic than what had been destroyed. The story of my betrayal by David would always be part of my family's history, but it would not define our future. Instead, it would serve as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, independence, and the courage to start over when circumstances require fundamental change. Elena and her brothers would grow up knowing that survival was possible even after devastating loss, and that rebuilding could result in something stronger and more authentic than what had been destroyed. Elena's 9th birthday brought an unexpected challenge when she came home from school asking detailed questions about divorce and why some families broke apart. Her best friend's parents were separating, and Elena was trying to understand how adults who once loved each other could become unable to live together peacefully. The conversation gave me an opportunity to discuss my own experience in age-appropriate terms, helping her understand that sometimes people change in ways that make relationships impossible to continue. I explained to Elena that some adults make promises they don't keep, or lie about important things, and that when trust is broken badly enough, it can't always be repaired. She listened with the serious attention that characterized her approach to difficult topics, asking thoughtful questions about how people could tell when someone was lying, and what signs might indicate that a relationship was in trouble. Carlos joined these conversations, sharing his own experience with his first marriage, and helping Elena understand that divorce didn't always mean that someone had done something terrible. Sometimes people simply grew apart or discovered they wanted different things from life. The distinction between his relatively amicable divorce and my experience with David's betrayal was important for Elena to understand as she developed her own ideas about relationships and trust. These discussions led to broader conversations about financial independence and the importance of maintaining individual strength even within loving partnerships. Elena was too young to understand the legal complexities of property ownership and financial fraud, but she could grasp the basic concept that adults should always understand what they were agreeing to when they signed important papers. I began teaching Elena about money management and basic financial concepts, giving her an allowance that she had to budget for both immediate wants and long-term savings goals. The lessons were simple but foundational, designed to help her develop habits of careful consideration and independent thinking that would serve her well in future relationships and business dealings. Carlos supported these educational efforts, adding his own perspectives about the importance of honest communication and mutual respect in partnerships. Together, we were creating a framework for Elena's understanding of healthy relationships that incorporated lessons from both our failed first marriages and our successful second marriage. The twins, now 5 years old and starting kindergarten, were beginning to show distinct personalities that reflected both their genetic heritage and their secure upbringing. Carlos Miguel displayed an analytical nature similar to my own, carefully observing situations before acting and asking detailed questions about how things worked. Diego inherited Carlos's steady temperament and natural leadership abilities, organizing games among his classmates and mediating disputes with diplomatic skill. Both boys were developing in an environment where adult relationships were characterized by collaboration and transparency, where disagreements were resolved through discussion rather than manipulation or deception. The contrast with David's approach to conflict, which had involved secrecy and unilateral decision-making, was obvious and intentional. Our family's financial situation continued to improve, as both Carlos and I reached senior levels in our respective careers. Morrison Associates expanded into commercial development projects throughout Southern California, with my leadership playing a crucial role in the firm's growth and success. Carlos's surgical practice had established him as one of San Diego's leading pediatric surgeons, with a reputation that attracted families from Mexico and other international locations. We celebrated these professional successes with measured enthusiasm, acknowledging our achievements while maintaining perspective about what truly mattered in our lives. The expensive lifestyle that had once seemed so important during my marriage to David now appeared hollow and potentially dangerous, a trap that could lead to financial overextension and moral compromise. Instead of luxury cars and designer clothing, we invested in experiences that brought our family closer together and assets that provided genuine long-term security. Family vacations focused on education and adventure, visiting national parks and historical sites that expanded our children's understanding of the world beyond San Diego's privileged bubble. Elena's 10th birthday marked a significant milestone in her development, as she began displaying the kind of mature thinking and ethical reasoning that would serve her well in navigating future challenges. Her birthday party was held at our home, with a guest list that reflected her own choices rather than social obligations or adult networking opportunities. Watching Elena interact with her friends, I was struck by her natural leadership abilities and her instinct for fairness in resolving conflicts among her peers. These qualities suggested that she was developing the kind of strong character that would protect her from manipulation and help her build authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than superficial attraction. The twins' 6th birthday celebration occurred just 2 months later, with a backyard party that showcased their growing personalities and interests. Carlos Miguel had developed a fascination with construction and engineering, spending hours building elaborate structures with blocks and asking detailed questions about the projects I was managing at work. Diego showed more interest in people than things, displaying natural empathy and communication skills that reminded me of Carlos's bedside manner with young patients. Both boys were thriving academically and socially, benefiting from the emotional security that came from having parents who approached child-rearing as equal partners. The contrast with my own childhood, marked by financial stress and my parents' constant worry about making ends meet, was stark but not forgotten. I wanted my children to have security, without losing appreciation for the effort required to maintain it. As Elena entered 5th grade and began the transition toward adolescence, I found myself reflecting more frequently on the lessons I wanted to pass on to her about relationships, independence, and personal strength. The story of my experience with David would eventually become part of her education about the complexities of adult relationships, but for now, the focus was on building her confidence and analytical skills. Elena's academic performance was excellent, particularly in mathematics and science, subjects that required the kind of logical thinking that would serve her well in whatever career she eventually chose. More importantly, she was developing strong friendships based on shared interests and values, rather than social status or material possessions. The foundation Carlos and I had discussed for helping victims of financial fraud finally became a reality when Elena was 11 years old. The Rodriguez-Martinez Foundation for Financial Justice was established with initial funding from our own resources and donations from colleagues who supported the cause. The organization provided legal assistance, counseling services, and educational programs for people who had been victimized by various forms of financial abuse. Working with the foundation gave new purpose to my experience with David, transforming personal pain into a tool for helping others navigate similar challenges. The legal knowledge I had gained during my own battles, the financial strategies I had developed for rebuilding security, and the emotional healing techniques I had learned through therapy could all be shared with people facing comparable situations. Elena showed interest in the foundation's work, asking questions about why adults would steal from people they claimed to love, and how families could protect themselves from such betrayals. Her questions were sophisticated for an 11-year-old, reflecting both her natural intelligence and her exposure to conversations about trust, independence, and financial responsibility. These discussions provided opportunities to teach Elena about the importance of maintaining individual strength, even within loving relationships, about the necessity of understanding legal documents before signing them, and about the warning signs that might indicate someone was not being completely honest about financial matters. Carlos contributed his own expertise to these conversations, sharing insights from his medical practice about how people responded to crisis and trauma. His perspective helped Elena understand that recovery from betrayal was possible, but required both time and active effort, that healing was not simply a matter of waiting for pain to disappear, but of working to rebuild strength and confidence. The twins, now 7 years old and in second grade, were beginning to understand basic concepts about money, fairness, and keeping promises. Their questions were simpler than Elena's, but equally important for their development into adults who could navigate complex relationships and financial decisions with wisdom and caution. Our family's Christmas celebration that year reflected our values and priorities, with gifts that emphasized experiences and education rather than expensive items that would quickly lose their appeal. Elena received art supplies and books that supported her growing interest in creative writing. The twins got building sets and science kits that encouraged exploration and experimentation. The holiday season also provided opportunities for teaching our children about generosity and social responsibility. We volunteered together at local charities and made donations to organizations that supported families facing financial hardship. These activities helped our children understand that their security was not guaranteed or universal, that many families struggled with problems far more serious than the challenges we faced in our comfortable life. Elena's 12th birthday arrived with the onset of adolescence and all the complexities that came with that developmental stage. Her questions about relationships became more sophisticated, reflecting her growing awareness of romantic attraction and her curiosity about how people chose partners and built lasting connections. These conversations required delicate balance between honesty about the realities of adult relationships and age-appropriate boundaries around topics that were too complex for a 12-year-old to fully understand. I shared stories about my courtship with Carlos, emphasizing the importance of mutual respect, shared values, and open communication in building lasting partnerships. The contrast with my relationship with David was part of these discussions, though I was careful to focus on general principles rather than specific details of his betrayal. Elena could understand that some people prioritize appearance over substance, that charm and expensive gifts were not reliable indicators of genuine character, and that the most important qualities in a partner were honesty, kindness, and reliability. Carlos reinforced these messages through his own interactions with our family, demonstrating daily the kind of consistent, supportive behavior that characterized healthy partnerships. His treatment of me as an equal partner in all major decisions, his involvement in childcare and household responsibilities, and his transparent approach to financial planning provided Elena with a practical example of what respectful relationships looked like. The twins were also absorbing these lessons through observation and participation in family discussions. At 8 years old, they were developing their own ideas about fairness, honesty, and cooperation, values that would shape their future relationships with friends, romantic partners, and business associates. Our family's financial security reached new heights when I was offered a position as Chief Development Officer for a major real estate investment firm based in Los Angeles. The opportunity represented a significant advancement in both responsibility and compensation, but it would require relocating our family and leaving the community we had built in San Diego. Carlos and I spent weeks discussing the decision, weighing the professional benefits against the personal costs of moving the children away from their friends and schools. The conversation process itself demonstrated the kind of collaborative decision-making that we wanted our children to observe and eventually emulate in their own relationships. Ultimately, we decided to decline the Los Angeles opportunity in favor of maintaining our family's stability and community connections. The decision reflected our shared priority of putting family welfare ahead of career advancement, a value system that had been shaped by both our experiences with failed first marriages and our commitment to building something lasting together. Elena's response to our decision process was particularly insightful, as she recognized the sacrifice involved in turning down professional opportunities for family reasons. Her understanding of the complexity of adult decisions demonstrated the kind of mature thinking that would serve her well in making her own life choices. The twins showed less awareness of the professional implications, but were clearly relieved to avoid the disruption of moving to a new city and starting over with new schools and friends. Their reaction reinforced our sense that we had made the right choice for our family's overall welfare. Elena's 13th birthday marked her official entry into adolescence, and brought new challenges related to peer pressure, social media, and the beginning of romantic interest. Her questions about relationships became more specific and urgent, reflecting her growing awareness of the romantic dynamics among her classmates. These conversations provided opportunities to discuss more sophisticated concepts about trust, independence, and the importance of maintaining individual identity within romantic relationships. I shared age-appropriate versions of lessons I had learned through my experience with David, emphasizing the importance of never allowing anyone to pressure her into decisions she didn't fully understand. Elena's natural analytical abilities were developing into sophisticated critical thinking skills that would protect her from manipulation and help her evaluate potential partners based on character rather than superficial qualities. Her academic performance remained excellent, particularly in subjects that required logical reasoning and careful analysis. The Foundation's work continued to expand, serving increasing numbers of families who had been victimized by various forms of financial fraud. My involvement in the organization provided ongoing reminders of how common such betrayals were, and how devastating they could be for families who lacked the resources and knowledge necessary for effective recovery. Working with other victims of financial fraud also reinforced my appreciation for the support system that had helped me rebuild my life after David's betrayal. Margaret Foster's legal expertise, Dr. Klein's therapeutic guidance, and Carlos's emotional support had been crucial elements in my recovery, resources that many people facing similar challenges could not access. The Foundation's educational programs became increasingly sophisticated, providing workshops on financial literacy, legal protection strategies, and emotional recovery techniques. My own story was occasionally used as a case study in these programs, though always with careful attention to privacy and appropriate boundaries. Elena showed continued interest in the Foundation's mission, expressing a desire to someday work in law or finance in ways that would help protect people from exploitation. Her career interests were still developing, but her commitment to using her talents for positive social impact was already clear. The twins, now 9 years old and in 4th grade, were developing their own interests and capabilities that suggested future career directions. Carlos Miguel's fascination with engineering and construction continued to grow, while Diego showed increasing interest in medicine and helping people, possibly influenced by his father's surgical career. Our family's financial planning had evolved to include college preparation for all 3 children, retirement savings that would ensure our long-term security, and philanthropic giving that reflected our values and social commitments. The contrast with my financial vulnerability during my marriage to David was stark and intentional, representing lessons learned through painful experience. Elena's 14th birthday celebration was more sophisticated than previous years, reflecting her growing maturity and changing interests. Her friends were beginning to pair off into romantic relationships, providing Elena with opportunities to observe different approaches to attraction, communication, and partnership among her peers. These observations led to meaningful conversations about the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationship dynamics, about the importance of maintaining friendships and individual interests even when romantically involved, and about recognizing warning signs that might indicate someone was not trustworthy or respectful. Elena's questions became increasingly specific as she navigated her own first romantic interests. Her approach to these relationships reflected the lessons she had absorbed about independence, respect, and honest communication, suggesting that our efforts to teach her about healthy partnerships had been successful. Carlos's involvement in these conversations was particularly valuable, as he could provide a male perspective on relationships while reinforcing the importance of treating partners with dignity and respect. His own behavior toward me provided Elena with a daily example of how men should treat women in healthy partnerships. The twins were also beginning to show interest in romantic relationships, though their understanding was still relatively simple and innocent. Their questions about love, marriage, and family provided opportunities to reinforce basic concepts about kindness, honesty, and mutual respect that would become more complex as they matured. Our family's 15th wedding anniversary celebration was a milestone that marked not just the success of our marriage, but the achievement of building something lasting and meaningful from the wreckage of our previous failed relationships. The party was small and intimate, reflecting our preference for genuine connections over social spectacle. Elena, now 15 and beginning her sophomore year of high school, gave a toast at the anniversary celebration that demonstrated her sophisticated understanding of what made relationships work. Her words reflected years of observation and discussion about trust, communication, and mutual support, lessons that would guide her own future partnerships. The twins, now 11 and entering middle school, were developing into confident young men who had never experienced the instability and deception that had marked my first marriage. Their sense of security and their understanding of healthy relationships had been shaped by consistent, positive examples rather than recovery from betrayal. Looking back on the journey from that terrible morning when I discovered David's empty office to this celebration of lasting partnership with Carlos, I was struck by how completely my life had been transformed. The frightened, financially vulnerable woman who had been manipulated into signing away her property rights had evolved into a confident mother, successful professional, and community leader. The lessons learned through betrayal and recovery had become the foundation for teaching my children about independence, caution, and the importance of building their own strength even within loving relationships. Elena and her brothers would face their own challenges as they matured and began forming romantic partnerships, but they would do so with knowledge and preparation that could protect them from many of the mistakes I had made. Elena's 16th birthday brought new freedoms and responsibilities, including her first job and her first serious romantic relationship. Watching her navigate these milestone experiences with wisdom and confidence provided validation that our efforts to prepare her for adult decision-making had been successful. Her approach to work was characterized by the same analytical thinking and attention to detail that marked her academic performance, suggesting that she was developing habits that would serve her well in whatever career she eventually chose. More importantly, her approach to romantic relationships reflected the lessons about respect, independence, and honest communication that Carlos and I had tried to model throughout her childhood. The Foundation's work had expanded to include educational programs for young adults about financial literacy and relationship safety, topics that were particularly relevant for Elena's generation, as they began making independent decisions about money and partnerships. Elena occasionally volunteered with these programs, sharing peer perspectives that complemented the adult expertise provided by professional staff. Elena's involvement with the Foundation gave her practical experience in helping others while reinforcing her own understanding of the principles we had tried to teach her. Her natural empathy and analytical abilities made her effective in working with young people who were learning to navigate complex decisions about trust and independence. As Elena prepared for her senior year of high school and began making decisions about college and career directions, I reflected on how successfully we had managed to break the cycle of betrayal and financial vulnerability that had marked my own early adult experiences. Elena would enter adulthood with knowledge, resources, and support systems that could protect her from many of the challenges that had nearly destroyed my life. The twins, now 13 and beginning high school themselves, were also demonstrating the kind of strong character and wise decision-making that suggested they would be able to navigate future challenges with confidence and integrity. Their understanding of relationships had been shaped by positive examples, rather than recovery from trauma, giving them advantages that would serve them well throughout their lives. Our family's financial security was now solid enough to weather virtually any crisis that might arise, providing a foundation of stability that allowed us to focus on relationships, personal growth, and community service rather than survival concerns. The contrast with my financial vulnerability during my marriage to David was stark and deeply appreciated. Elena's graduation from high school marked the successful completion of our most important project as parents, the raising of a young woman who could think independently, make wise decisions, and build healthy relationships based on mutual respect and honest communication. Her acceptance to Stanford University with a full academic scholarship reflected not just her intellectual abilities, but her character and leadership potential. As Elena prepared to leave home for college, I felt confident that we had given her the tools she would need to protect herself from manipulation while remaining open to genuine love and partnership. The story of my betrayal by David had become part of her education about the complexities of adult relationships, but it had not made her cynical or fearful about the possibility of finding lasting happiness. The Foundation's mission continued to evolve, expanding to include research on financial fraud prevention and advocacy for stronger legal protections for victims of economic abuse. My own experience with David had provided insights that proved valuable in developing programs that could help other families avoid similar betrayals, or recover more effectively when such betrayals occurred. Looking ahead to the twins, high school graduation, and Elena's progression through college, and into her independent adult life, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction about what Carlos and I had built together. We had transformed the pain of our failed first marriages into the foundation for lasting happiness, financial security, and most importantly, the successful raising of 3 children who understood the difference between genuine love and its counterfeit. The house in Mission Hills had become more than just a residence. It was a symbol of recovery, growth, and the possibility of building something authentic from the ruins of what had been destroyed by deception. Elena and her brothers would carry forward the lessons learned within its walls, equipped to build their own lives based on truth rather than illusion. My experience with David's betrayal would always be part of my story, but it no longer defined my future or limited my possibilities. Instead, it had become a source of strength, wisdom, and purpose that had enabled me to help others while building something beautiful with Carlos and our children. The journey from victim to survivor to thriving success had been long and difficult, but it had been worth every challenge along the way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.